The morning sun cast long shadows across Austin's downtown streets as James "Jimmy" Henderson wheeled himself onto the sidewalk of Congress Avenue. At 78, his weathered hands gripped the wheels of his wheelchair with the same determination that had once carried him through the jungles of Vietnam 55 years ago. The Memorial Day parade wouldn't begin for another 3 hours, but Jimmy always arrived early. It gave him time to find the perfect spot, away from the crowds, but close enough to feel connected to something larger than his small apartment and endless quiet days. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her press badge and checked her camera equipment one more time. As a junior reporter for the Austin Chronicle, she'd been assigned to cover the Memorial Day celebration. Hardly the groundbreaking journalism she'd dreamed of when she moved to Texas 2 years ago. But Sarah had learned that every story mattered, especially the ones that seemed ordinary on the surface. "Another parade, another day," she muttered to herself, scanning the gathering crowd for interesting angles. That's when she noticed him, an elderly man in a wheelchair, wearing a faded military jacket adorned with ribbons and patches. He sat alone, watching the setup with eyes that seemed to hold decades of untold stories. Marcus Thompson ran his hand through his hair for the dozenth time that morning, his clipboard filled with last-minute details and logistics. As the lead organizer for Austin's Memorial Day celebration, he felt the weight of coordinating an event that would host thousands of attendees, dozens of military units, and culminate with a performance by Willie Nelson himself. At 32, Marcus had built his reputation on flawless execution. But this year felt different. The pressure to deliver something meaningful, not just spectacular, gnawed at him. "Marcus, we need to talk about the stage positioning," called Rebecca Davis, his assistant coordinator, jogging up with her own clipboard and a look of concern. "The sound engineer says Willie's equipment needs more space than we allocated." "How much more space?" Marcus asked, already calculating the domino effect this would have on crowd flow and security barriers. "About 15 feet in each direction. It means we'll have to move the veteran seating section further back." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. The veteran seating section was supposed to be front and center, a place of honor for those who had served. Moving them back felt wrong, but Willie Nelson's performance was the main draw that would bring national attention to Austin's celebration. "Let's figure it out," he said, though his stomach churned at the compromise he might have to make. 3 miles away, in his modest home studio, Willie Nelson sat with his guitar, Trigger, working through the songs he'd perform later. At 91, Willie had performed at more events than he could count. But Memorial Day held special significance. His own father had served in World War I, and Willie understood the weight of honoring those who had sacrificed for their country. His manager, Patricia Reynolds, knocked on the studio door. "Willie, we need to leave for sound check in an hour. The organizers want to run through your set one more time." "Pat, you ever think about the folks who come to these things?" Willie asked, not looking up from his guitar. "I mean, the real folks, the ones who served." Patricia had worked with Willie for over a decade and recognized that philosophical tone in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I've been doing this for 70 years. And sometimes I wonder if we're putting on a show or actually honoring people. There's a difference, you know." Back on Congress Avenue, Jimmy Henderson watched the organized chaos of event setup with a mix of fascination and melancholy. He remembered his own homecoming from Vietnam. No parades, no celebrations, just protests and anger. The country had been divided then, and sometimes it felt just as divided now, though for different reasons. A young woman with a camera approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Sarah Mitchell with the Austin Chronicle. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about today's celebration?" Jimmy looked up at her, surprised. It had been months since anyone had shown genuine interest in talking to him. "I suppose that would be all right, miss. How long have you been attending Memorial Day events here in Austin?" "This'll be my 15th year," Jimmy replied, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age. "Started coming after my wife passed. She always said I should get out more, connect with people." Sarah sat down on the curb next to his wheelchair, pulling out her notebook. Something about this man's presence commanded attention, respect. "You're a veteran yourself?" "Vietnam, 1969 to 1971. 101st Airborne." He touched one of the patches on his jacket with pride. "Lost a lot of good friends over there. This day isn't just about celebration for me. It's about remembering." As Sarah listened to Jimmy's stories, she began to realize that the real story of Memorial Day wasn't in the spectacle of the parade, or even Willie Nelson's performance. It was in the quiet dignity of men like Jimmy Henderson, who carried their service and sacrifice with them every day, often in solitude. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson was discovering that his logistical nightmare was becoming an ethical dilemma. The veteran seating had to be moved not just back, but to the side, where sightlines would be partially obstructed by sound equipment and security barriers. "This isn't right," he told Rebecca as they surveyed the layout. "These are the people we're supposed to be honoring." "I know, but the permit requirements and Willie's technical needs don't leave us much choice. The show must go on, right?" Marcus stared at the section where folding chairs were being arranged for veterans and their families. He'd gotten into event planning because he loved bringing people together, creating moments of joy and connection. But somewhere along the way, the logistics had become more important than the purpose. "Let me think about this," he said. "There has to be a better way." By mid-afternoon, the streets were filling with families, tourists, and locals eager for the celebration. Food trucks lined the side streets, vendors sold flags and memorabilia, and children ran around with small American flags clutched in their hands. The atmosphere was festive, patriotic, and energetic. Jimmy Henderson remained in his chosen spot, now joined by a few other veterans who had discovered his prime location. They shared stories, compared service records, and watched the crowd grow around them. But Jimmy noticed something that troubled him. Despite being surrounded by thousands of people celebrating military service, he felt increasingly invisible. Sarah Mitchell had spent the afternoon interviewing various attendees, getting quotes and taking photos for her article. But she kept returning to Jimmy, drawn by his stories and his perspective. As the afternoon wore on, she noticed how people walked past him without acknowledgement, how families posed for photos around him as if he were part of the scenery, rather than a living piece of the history they were commemorating. "Mr. Henderson," she said, sitting back down beside him, "how does it feel to be here today, surrounded by all this celebration of military service?" Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of teenagers take selfies with the parade route in the background. "You know, miss, it's a strange thing. This whole day is supposed to be about us, about the folks who served. But sometimes it feels like we're just decorations in someone else's party." His words hit Sarah with unexpected force. She looked around at the crowd with new eyes, seeing how the celebration had become more about the spectacle than the people it claimed to honor. Willie Nelson arrived at the venue as the sun began to lower in the sky. His sound check went smoothly, but as he stood on stage looking out at the crowd gathering in front of him, he felt that same nagging sense he'd had all morning. Something about the setup bothered him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. "Pat," he called to his manager, "where are the veterans sitting?" Patricia consulted her notes. "Over there, to the right of the main seating area." Willie squinted in that direction and frowned. "They're pretty far back, aren't they?" The organizers said it was the best they could do with the space requirements. Willie didn't respond, but something didn't sit right with him. He'd performed for military audiences around the world, And he knew that the people being honored should be front and center, not tucked away where they couldn't properly see or be seen. As evening approached and the parade prepared to begin, Marcus Thompson did one final walkthrough of the route and event spaces. He paused at the veteran seating section, watching as elderly men and women, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, some with family members helping them to their seats, settled into their assigned area. An older woman struggled to see over the sound equipment that blocked part of her view. A man in a wheelchair had to crane his neck to catch glimpses of the stage. These were the people who had served their country, and Marcus had failed them in favor of logistics and spectacle. "Rebecca," he said into his radio, "I need you to meet me at the veteran seating section. We have a problem to fix." "Marcus, the parade starts in 20 minutes. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that matters more than staying on schedule." As the first military units began to line up for the parade, Jimmy Henderson felt the familiar mix of pride and sadness that these events always brought him. He was proud of his service, proud of the young men and women who continued to serve, but sad for the friends who hadn't made it home, and sad for how disconnected he often felt from the very community that claimed to support him. Sarah Mitchell had decided that Jimmy's story would be the centerpiece of her article. Here was a man who embodied the true spirit of Memorial Day, not the pageantry and politics, but the personal cost and quiet dignity of service. She had spent hours with him, and she was beginning to understand that the real story wasn't happening on stage or in the parade. It was happening in the spaces between the celebration, in the moments when nobody was looking. As the sun set over Austin and the Memorial Day celebration prepared to begin, 5 lives were converging toward a moment that none of them could have predicted. A moment that would remind an entire nation what it truly means to honor those who have served. The parade was about to begin. Willie Nelson was tuning his guitar for the final time, and Jimmy Henderson sat in his wheelchair, ready to watch another celebration of service, while feeling increasingly forgotten by the very people celebrating around him. None of them knew that in just a few hours, a simple act of recognition and respect would touch millions of hearts and remind America that behind every uniform is a person deserving of dignity, acknowledgement, and honor. The first drums of the parade echoed through downtown Austin as military units began their march down Congress Avenue. Marcus Thompson stood at the command post, watching monitors that showed various angles of the parade route, but his attention kept drifting to the veteran seating section. Despite his best last-minute efforts, he'd only been able to improve the sight lines marginally. The guilt gnawed at him as he watched elderly veterans straining to see the parade that was meant to honor them. "Marcus, Channel 7 wants to interview you about the Willie Nelson performance," Rebecca said, approaching with a camera crew in tow. "Not now, Rebecca. Can you handle it?" His eyes remained fixed on the monitors, particularly the one showing Jimmy Henderson's section. Rebecca followed his gaze. "You're really bothered by the seating situation, aren't you? Look at them, Rebecca. Mr. Henderson over there. He's been coming to this for 15 years. Mrs. Garcia next to him lost her son in Iraq. These aren't just attendees. They're the reason we're here. And we stuck them in the worst seats in the house." Sarah Mitchell moved through the crowd, her camera capturing moments of celebration, but her heart was heavy with the story she was uncovering. She'd spent more time with Jimmy and had met several other veterans throughout the day. Each conversation revealed the same theme: gratitude for the recognition, but a profound sense of being overlooked as individuals with ongoing needs and stories worth telling. "The parade's beautiful this year," said Eleanor Garcia, a 72-year-old woman sitting next to Jimmy. Her gold star pin caught the light from the street lamps. "My son would have loved this." "How long has it been?" Jimmy asked gently. 12 years this fall. IED in Baghdad. Eleanor's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I come every year. It helps me feel like he's still being remembered by someone other than me. Sarah overheard the conversation and felt her throat tighten. These weren't just statistics or symbols. They were people carrying profound losses, finding what comfort they could in public displays of gratitude that often felt hollow in their execution. The parade continued with precision and pageantry. High school marching bands played patriotic songs, vintage military vehicles rumbled past, and active duty service members marched in perfect formation. The crowd cheered enthusiastically, children waved flags, and the atmosphere was undeniably celebratory. But Willie Nelson, watching from backstage, felt increasingly uncomfortable with the disconnect he was witnessing. From his vantage point, he could see both the enthusiastic crowd and the veteran seating section. The contrast was stark. While thousands cheered loudly for the parade, the veterans themselves seemed almost like an afterthought, positioned where they could barely see, and certainly couldn't be properly seen or acknowledged by the crowd. "Pat, I need you to find out who's in charge of this event," Willie said to his manager. "That would be Marcus Thompson. Is there a problem with the performance setup?" "No, the performance setup is fine. It's everything else that's bothering me." Willie had performed at countless military and veteran events throughout his career. He'd played for troops overseas, at VA hospitals, and at memorial services. He understood that these events served multiple purposes: honoring service, bringing communities together, and sometimes raising funds or awareness for veteran causes. But the best events, the ones that mattered most, always put the veterans themselves at the center of everything. Back in the crowd, Jimmy Henderson was struggling with mixed emotions. The parade was impressive, and he felt pride watching the young service members march past. But he also felt a growing sense of invisibility. Thousands of people were celebrating military service all around him, but he might as well have been watching from home on television for all the personal connection he felt to the event. A group of college students nearby were taking selfies with the parade in the background, laughing and having fun. Jimmy didn't begrudge them their enjoyment. He was glad people were engaged with Memorial Day. But he wondered if they understood what they were actually commemorating, or if it had become just another opportunity for entertainment. "Excuse me, sir?" A young boy, maybe 8 years old, had approached Jimmy's wheelchair. His parents were a few steps behind, looking slightly embarrassed. "Yes, son. Were you in a war?" Jimmy smiled at the directness of the question. "Yes, I was. In Vietnam, a long time ago." "Did you get hurt?" The boy's parents started to intervene, but Jimmy waved them off. "Yes, I did. But I was one of the lucky ones. I made it home." "Thank you for keeping us safe," the boy said solemnly, then ran back to his parents. It was a simple interaction, but it reminded Jimmy why these events mattered, even when they felt impersonal. Sometimes one genuine moment of connection could make all the pageantry worthwhile. Sarah Mitchell had been observing this exchange, and many others like it, throughout the evening. She was beginning to see that Memorial Day celebrations existed on multiple levels simultaneously. There was the official ceremony, the public spectacle, the personal remembrance, and the individual connections between strangers. The challenge was making sure all these levels worked together rather than at cross purposes. Marcus Thompson's radio crackled with updates from various stations along the parade route. Everything was running smoothly from a logistical standpoint, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd lost sight of the event's true purpose. He'd become so focused on creating a successful public event that he'd failed to adequately honor the people it was meant to serve. "Rebecca, after Willie's performance, I want to personally visit every veteran in that section and apologize for the poor seating." "Marcus, You did the best you could with the constraints you had. Did I? Or did I prioritize the wrong things?" He paused, watching a group of World War II veterans, all in their late 90s, being helped to their seats by family members. These might be some of these gentlemen's last Memorial Days. We should have moved heaven and earth to make sure they had the best seats in the house. As the parade neared its conclusion, Willie Nelson prepared to take the stage. His set list included classics like On the Road Again and Whiskey River, but also more contemplative pieces like Living in the Promised Land and his version of Amazing Grace. He'd performed these songs hundreds of times, but tonight they felt different. Tonight, he was thinking about the faces he'd seen in the veteran section, the quiet dignity of men and women who had served their country, and were now watching a celebration of that service from the margins. "Willie, you're on in 5 minutes," a stagehand announced. Willie nodded, cradling Trigger in his arms. As he walked toward the stage, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of going directly to the stage, he took a detour through the crowd toward the veteran seating section. "Willie, where are you going?" Patricia called after him. "You're supposed to be on stage in 3 minutes." "I need to do something first," he called back, continuing through the crowd. People began to notice Willie Nelson walking through the audience, and a buzz of excitement followed him. Phones came out, photos were taken, and people called his name. But Willie's attention was focused on the elderly man in the wheelchair he'd noticed earlier, Jimi Henderson. Sarah Mitchell saw Willie approaching and instinctively raised her camera, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The crowd noise was growing as people realized Willie was among them instead of on stage. Jimi Henderson looked up, confused by the commotion, and was shocked to see Willie Nelson walking directly toward him. The legendary musician stopped in front of Jimmy's wheelchair and extended his hand. "Thank you for your service, son," Willie said simply. Jimmy shook Willie's hand, too surprised to speak. Around them, the crowd had quieted, sensing they were witnessing something special. "What's your name?" Willie asked. "James Henderson, sir. But everyone calls me Jimmy." "Well, Jimmy, I've been watching you tonight, and I think you deserve better than a seat in the back corner. What do you say we move this party somewhere everyone can see a real American hero?" Before Jimmy could respond, Willie began pushing the wheelchair toward the stage. The crowd parted, and a hush fell over the thousands of people gathered for the celebration. Marcus Thompson, watching from his command post, felt his throat tighten as he realized what was happening. Sarah Mitchell followed, her camera capturing every moment as Willie Nelson, one of America's most beloved musicians, slowly pushed James Henderson's wheelchair through the crowd toward the stage. Other veterans in the section began to follow, supported by family members and fellow attendees who instinctively understood the significance of the moment. The simple act of recognition was becoming something much larger, a moment of authentic honor that transcended the planned programming and touched something deeper in everyone present. As Willie reached the stage area with Jimmy, he turned to address the crowd through a microphone someone had handed him. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my new friend, Jimi Henderson. He served in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne, and he's been coming to this Memorial Day celebration for 15 years. I think it's about time we made sure he had a front row seat." The crowd erupted in applause. But it was different from the routine applause that had punctuated the evening's events. This was emotional, genuine, and unified in a way that surprised everyone present. Marcus Thompson felt tears in his eyes as he watched Willie arrange for Jimmy and several other veterans to be seated in the front row, right next to the stage. This was what he'd wanted to achieve all along but had lost sight of in the complexity of event planning. Sarah Mitchell knew she was witnessing the story of a lifetime. But more than that, she was seeing what Memorial Day was supposed to be about. Not just remembering those who had died in service, but honoring those who had served and were still among us, ensuring they knew their sacrifice was recognized and valued. As Willie finally took the stage and began his performance, with Jimmy Henderson and other veterans now prominently seated in places of honor, the entire energy of the event shifted. What had been a well-executed but somewhat impersonal celebration became something intimate and meaningful. The first song Willie played was "Amazing Grace," and as his weathered voice carried across the crowd, everyone understood that they were no longer just attending an event. They were participating in a moment of genuine tribute and connection. The video began appearing on social media within minutes of Willie's impromptu gesture. Sarah Mitchell had captured the entire sequence. Willie leaving the stage to find Jimmy Henderson, the conversation between the two men, and the slow procession through the crowd as Willie pushed Jimmy's wheelchair to the front row. But it was the audio she caught that made the footage truly powerful. "This is what America should be about," someone in the crowd had said as Willie passed by. "Taking care of the people who took care of us." By the time Willie finished his first song, hashtags were already forming. Willie honors vets. Jai Jimmy Henderson. Jai Real Patriotism. The video was being shared across platforms: TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, with comments pouring in from across the country. Marcus Thompson watched the social media explosion from his command post with a mixture of amazement and regret. Willie Nelson had accomplished in 5 minutes what Marcus had failed to do in months of planning. He'd made the veterans the true center of the celebration. "Marcus, CNN is calling," Rebecca said, holding out a phone. "They want to know if we have contact information for the veteran Willie honored. AP is asking for background on the event. This is going viral." But Marcus wasn't thinking about media attention. He was thinking about all the other Jimmy Hendersons who had attended Memorial Day events over the years, sitting in inadequate seats, overlooked by the very celebrations meant to honor them. "Rebecca, I need you to compile a list of everyone who helped plan this event. We're having a meeting tomorrow morning to talk about how we do this better next year." Marcus, this is good publicity. The event is being called the most heartwarming Memorial Day celebration in the country. It's not about publicity. It's about doing right by the people who serve. Meanwhile, Jimmy Henderson was experiencing something he hadn't felt in years, being truly seen and valued. As Willie performed song after song, he frequently turned to acknowledge Jimmy and the other veterans now seated in the front row. Between songs, Willie would share stories about his father's service in World War I, about friends who had served, about the responsibility all Americans had to care for their veterans. "This next song is dedicated to Jimmy Henderson and all the warriors who came home," Willie announced before launching into a moving version of "Living in the Promised Land." Trudrid. Eleanor Garcia, now seated next to Jimmy in the front row, leaned over and whispered, "My son would have loved this. He always said Willie Nelson was the most authentic voice in America." "Your son was right," Jimmy replied, feeling more connected to the celebration than he had in all his 15 years of attending. Sarah Mitchell was live tweeting the event. Her articles would follow, but she knew she was witnessing something that transcended typical news coverage. This was a story about dignity, recognition, and the power of simple human gestures to transform entire communities. It's Sarah Mitchell, TX. Watching Willie Nelson honor Vietnam veteran Jimmy Henderson is reminding me why journalism matters. Some stories choose you. On Memorial Day, Chan Food Willie Nelson. Her tweet was retweeted hundreds of times within the first hour, with people sharing their own stories of veterans in their families, their communities, their lives. As Willie's performance continued, something beautiful began happening in the crowd. People started approaching the veteran seating area, not to take selfies or ask for autographs, but to shake hands, to say thank you, to listen to stories. The barrier between performers and audience, between honorees and celebrants, began dissolving. A teenage girl approached an elderly Korean War veteran and asked if she could sit with him during the performance. A family with young children struck up a conversation with a woman who had served as an army nurse in Iraq. College students began helping elderly veterans get closer to the stage or find better viewing positions. Willie noticed this shift in the crowd's energy and smiled. This was what he'd hoped for. Not just a performance, but a genuine moment of community and connection. "Pat," he said to his manager during a brief break between songs, "cancel my after-party plans. I want to spend time talking to these veterans after the show." "Willie, you have interviews scheduled with..." "Cancel them. This is more important." Back in the crowd, the video of Willie's gesture was continuing to spread at an unprecedented pace. News outlets were picking up the story, celebrities were sharing the footage, and ordinary Americans were posting their own responses and memories. Senator Martinez, "This is what leadership looks like. Thank you, Willie Nelson, for showing us how to truly honor our veterans." Memorial Day. Veterans Foundation. In 30 seconds, Willie Nelson did more for veteran recognition than most political speeches accomplish in 30 minutes. This is beautiful. Honor them. Gold Star Mom, crying, watching this. "My son gave everything for this country." Seeing this veteran honored this way, it matters. It all matters. The responses weren't just from military families or political figures. Teachers were sharing the video as an example of respect and dignity. Parents were using it to explain to their children what it means to honor those who serve. Veterans organizations were reposting it with their own stories of members who deserved recognition. But perhaps most powerfully, other veterans were sharing their own experiences of feeling invisible at events meant to honor them. Viet Vet Dad. "I've been to dozens of these celebrations and felt like a prop. What Willie did here? This is what respect looks like." Nurse Veteran. "As a female veteran, I often feel overlooked at military events. Seeing Willie center that gentleman's humanity, powerful." Young Vet 22. "Just got back from Afghanistan. Seeing how Willie honored this Vietnam vet gives me hope that my service will be remembered too." Sarah Mitchell was collecting these responses for her follow-up articles. But she was also deeply moved by the way Willie's simple gesture had opened space for veterans to share their experiences of both honor and invisibility. As the performance neared its end, Willie announced his final song. This last one is for Jimmy Henderson, for all the veterans here tonight, and for the ones who didn't make it home. It's called "Angels Flying Too Close to the Ground." The song, one of Willie's most beloved compositions, took on new meaning in this context. As his voice carried across the crowd, thousands of people stood in respectful silence. Many were crying, veterans, family members, strangers who had been touched by the evening's unexpected turn. Jimmy Henderson felt tears running down his cheeks as he listened to the song. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition, of feeling valued, of being reminded that his service mattered not just as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience that deserved acknowledgement. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous and sustained. But Willie wasn't finished. Instead of taking his bow and leaving the stage, he came down to where Jimmy and the other veterans were seated. "Jimmy, would you do me the honor of standing with me for a moment?" Willie asked. Jimmy looked uncertain. "Mr. Nelson, I can't stand. I haven't been able to walk since Vietnam." "Then I'll stand with you right where you are," Willie said, placing his hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jimmy Henderson. He's 78 years old. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, and he's been coming to this Memorial Day celebration for 15 years because he believes in honoring service. I think we should honor him." The crowd's response was unlike anything anyone present had ever experienced. It wasn't just applause, it was a sustained expression of gratitude and respect that seemed to go on forever. People were cheering, crying, chanting, "Jimmy! Jimmy! Jimmy!" But the most powerful moment came when Willie knelt down next to Jimmy's wheelchair and spoke quietly into his ear. "Thank you for your service, and thank you for reminding me what this is all about." The gesture was captured on dozens of cameras, but the words were private, between two men who understood sacrifice and service in their own ways. As the official event concluded and the crowd began to disperse, something extraordinary happened. Instead of leaving, hundreds of people lingered, waiting for opportunities to meet Jimmy and the other veterans. Lines formed of families wanting to shake hands, to say thank you, to listen to stories. Sarah Mitchell watched this organic, unplanned extension of the celebration with amazement. Willie's gesture had created space for the kind of genuine human connection that the official program, despite its good intentions, had failed to facilitate. "This is the real story," she said to herself, taking notes as she watched a young soldier home on leave, deep in conversation with a Vietnam veteran. Two generations of service members sharing experiences across decades. Marcus Thompson finally left his command post and walked through the crowd, observing the interactions still taking place nearly an hour after the official event had ended. He found Willie Nelson still there, sitting on the edge of the stage, talking with a group of veterans. "Mr. Nelson," Marcus said, approaching hesitantly, "I want to thank you for what you did tonight, and I want to apologize for the seating arrangement. We should have done better." Willie looked up at him with those wise, weathered eyes. "Son, you put together a fine event, but next year, maybe start with the people you're honoring and build everything else around them." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Marcus replied. "I promise you that." As the evening finally wound down and the last of the crowd dispersed, Jimmy Henderson found himself surrounded by new friends, veterans and civilians alike, who had been touched by Willie's gesture and wanted to ensure Jimmy knew he wasn't alone. "Jimmy," said Tom Bradley, a Gulf War veteran who had approached him after the show, "a few of us get together for breakfast every Tuesday at the diner on 6th Street. Would you like to join us?" For the first time in months, Jimmy's calendar had something to look forward to beyond medical appointments and grocery runs. Sarah Mitchell drove home that night with a story that was already writing itself, but more importantly, with a renewed understanding of why journalism mattered. Sometimes the best stories weren't the ones you went looking for. They were the ones that found you and reminded you of the humanity that connected everyone. The video of Willie Nelson honoring Jimmy Henderson would be viewed millions of times over the next few days. But the real impact of that moment was just beginning. It had started conversations about how America treats its veterans, inspired similar gestures of recognition across the country, and reminded people that true patriotism wasn't about grand gestures or political statements. It was about seeing and valuing the individual human beings who had served something larger than themselves. As Austin slept, the story was still spreading, touching hearts and changing minds, one share, one comment, one conversation at a time. By Tuesday morning, the video had been viewed over 10 million times across all platforms. Major news networks were running feature stories, and the footage of Willie Nelson pushing Jimmy Henderson's wheelchair through the crowd had become the defining image of Memorial Day 2024. Sarah Mitchell's phone hadn't stopped ringing since Monday night. CNN, NBC, CBS, and Fox News all wanted interviews. Publishers were reaching out about book deals. But her focus remained on the human story at the center of the viral moment. She was having breakfast at the diner on 6th Street, the same one where Jimmy Henderson was meeting his new group of veteran friends, when she spotted them at a corner booth. Jimmy was laughing at something Tom Bradley had said, and Sarah could see a lightness in his demeanor that hadn't been there just 2 days earlier. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, approaching their table with her coffee cup. "Sarah, please, sit down," Jimmy said warmly. "Boys, this is the reporter I told you about. She's the one who's been telling our stories." The group had grown since Tuesday. Along with Tom Bradley, Gulf War Army, there was Maria Santos, Iraq veteran, Marines, Robert Kim, Afghanistan, Navy, and David Thompson, Vietnam, Air Force. Word had spread through veteran networks, and more were planning to join in coming weeks. "Have you seen the news coverage?" Maria asked Sarah. "They're calling it the most important moment in veteran recognition in decades." Sarah nodded. "But I'm more interested in what it means to all of you personally. How has this changed things?" David Thompson, who was roughly Jimmy's age, spoke up. "I'll tell you what it's changed. For the first time in 50 years, I feel like people see us as individuals, not just symbols. That boy Willie, he didn't just honor Jimmy, he honored all of us. The phone calls are what get me," Jimmy added. "My nephew in California called yesterday. We hadn't talked in 2 years. He saw the video and wanted to reconnect. My neighbor from down the hall, I've been living in that building for 8 years, and we'd never had a real conversation. She knocked on my door Sunday night with a casserole and stayed for 3 hours listening to stories." Sarah made notes, but she was also just enjoying being part of the conversation. These weren't just sources for her story. They were becoming friends. Meanwhile, Willie Nelson was experiencing his own version of unexpected connection. His social media following had increased by over 1 million followers since Monday night. But more importantly, he was hearing from veterans and military families across the country. His publicist, Patricia Reynolds, was fielding hundreds of interview requests, speaking engagement offers, and corporate sponsorship opportunities. But Willie had made it clear what his priorities were. "Pat, set up meetings with veteran organizations. I want to learn more about what they need, not just during Memorial Day, but year-round. Willie, 60 Minutes wants to do a feature story. People magazine wants you for their cover. These are huge opportunities." "Fine, but I'll only do interviews if they include veterans like Jimmy. This isn't about me, it's about them." Willie had spent Monday evening at Jimmy's apartment complex, meeting other residents and learning about the challenges facing elderly veterans. The building housed 43 units, and nearly half were occupied by veterans. Many were dealing with health issues, financial struggles, and isolation. "Pat, I want to do something about this building. These folks shouldn't be struggling to pay for medicine or decent food. Can we set up some kind of foundation?" Marcus Thompson was having his own revelation. His Tuesday morning meeting with the event planning team had turned into a 3-hour soul-searching session about the purpose and execution of public celebrations honoring veterans. "I keep thinking about what Willie said," Marcus told his team. "Start with the people you're honoring and build everything else around them. We've been doing it backwards, building a show and then trying to fit veterans into it." Rebecca Davis had been quiet through most of the meeting, but finally spoke up. "I've been reading the social media responses. There are veterans from all over the country sharing stories about feeling invisible at events meant to honor them. We're not the only ones who've gotten this wrong. Then, let's be part of getting it right," Marcus said. "I want us to completely reimagine how we approach these events. What if instead of seating veterans in a designated section, we integrated them throughout the crowd? What if we made sure every veteran had a buddy from the community? Someone to sit with, talk to, make sure they felt welcomed?" The team spent the rest of the morning brainstorming ways to make future events more veteran-centered. They contacted other cities' event planners, reaching out to share ideas and learn from each other's experiences. By Wednesday, the story had evolved beyond just a viral video. News outlets were conducting deeper investigations into veteran support systems, interviewing experts about isolation among elderly veterans, and examining how communities could better honor and support those who had served. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a researcher at the University of Texas who studied veteran reintegration, was fielding calls from reporters across the country. What we saw in Austin wasn't just about one gesture, she explained to a CNN reporter. It was about visibility and dignity. Many veterans, particularly older ones, report feeling forgotten by the communities they served. They attend these events hoping for connection and recognition, but often leave feeling more isolated than when they arrived. The Willie Nelson moment had created space for these difficult conversations. Veterans organizations reported increased calls to their support lines. Not crisis calls, but veterans wanting to connect, to share their stories, to find community. At the VA hospital in Austin, social worker Jennifer Martinez noticed an immediate change in her patients' demeanor. They're talking about the video, but more than that, they're talking about feeling seen, she told her supervisor. Mr. Henderson's experience is resonating with veterans across all age groups and service eras. They're asking about support groups, community events, ways to connect with other veterans. The hospital decided to host a special screening of the video, followed by a discussion about veteran community and support. The event, planned for the following week, filled up within hours of being announced. Meanwhile, Jimmy Henderson was adjusting to his newfound visibility. His mailbox was full of letters from across the country, thank you notes from other veterans, invitations to speak at events, requests for interviews, but the attention that meant the most to him was local and personal. "Jimmy, we'd like you to be the Grand Marshal of our 4th of July parade," said City Councilwoman Lisa Rodriguez, who had visited him Wednesday afternoon. "The city wants to formally recognize your service and your role in reminding us all what Memorial Day should be about." Jimmy was honored, but also overwhelmed. "Ma'am, I appreciate it, but I'm not sure I'm Grand Marshal material. I'm just an old soldier who got lucky enough to meet Willie Nelson." "Mr. Henderson, you're exactly the kind of person who should be a Grand Marshal. You've served with honor, and now you're helping your community remember what service means." Sarah Mitchell's initial article had been picked up by the Associated Press and was running in newspapers across the country. But she was already working on follow-up pieces, diving deeper into the issues Willie's gesture had brought to light. Her research revealed troubling statistics. Older veterans were experiencing isolation and depression at rates significantly higher than their civilian counterparts. Many felt disconnected from the communities they had served, despite the public rhetoric about supporting troops and veterans. But she was also finding inspiring examples of communities that were doing better. In Cleveland, a program paired veterans with local families for weekly dinners. In Seattle, a coffee shop offered free breakfast to veterans every morning and had become an informal gathering place. In Denver, high school students were visiting elderly veterans as part of a service learning program. "The Austin moment is inspiring similar efforts across the country," Sarah wrote in her follow-up article. "It's as if Willie Nelson's simple gesture of recognition gave communities permission to think more creatively about how they support their veterans." Willie Nelson himself was learning about these initiatives and using his platform to highlight them. His social media accounts, typically focused on music and touring updates, had become a clearinghouse for veteran support programs and community initiatives. Saw this story about kids in Phoenix reading to veterans at the VA hospital, he posted on Instagram, along with a photo from the program. This is what taking care of each other looks like. By Thursday, the ripple effects were international. The video had been shared by news outlets in the UK, Canada, Australia, and other countries with their own veteran populations. Military families stationed overseas were posting their own responses, sharing stories of how Willie's gesture had reminded them of why their service mattered. But perhaps the most meaningful development was happening back in Austin, in Jimmy Henderson's apartment building. Inspired by Willie's visit and the attention it had brought to their community, residents had organized their own support network. Mrs. Tiu Chen from Unit 3B, a Korean War widow, had started a weekly dinner gathering in the building's community room. Captain, retired Johnson from Unit 7A, was coordinating transportation for residents who needed help getting to medical appointments. Maria Gutierrez, a Gulf War veteran from Unit 5C, had established a phone tree to check on neighbors who lived alone. "It's funny," Jimmy told Sarah during one of their regular check-ins. "Willie pushing my wheelchair for 30 seconds has created more community in this building than we'd had in 8 years. Sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you as a person instead of just another face in the crowd." The building's management had taken notice as well. They'd started a monthly newsletter highlighting residents' military service, organized a community garden project, and were planning improvements to make the building more accessible for residents with mobility challenges. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the Memorial Day celebration, Willie Nelson made an unannounced visit to Jimmy's building. He spent the morning meeting residents, hearing their stories, and learning about the community initiatives that had developed since his viral gesture. "This is what I was hoping for," Willie told Sarah, who had been invited to document the visit. "Not the fame or the media attention, but this, real people connecting with each other, taking care of each other." Willie announced that he would be establishing a foundation focused on supporting veteran communities, with Jimmy Henderson's building serving as a pilot program for initiatives that could be replicated elsewhere. "We're going to call it the Jimmy Henderson Foundation for Veteran Community," Willie said, with Jimmy sitting beside him, looking both honored and slightly overwhelmed by the announcement. The week had also brought changes for Marcus Thompson. His reassessment of event planning had caught the attention of the National Association of Memorial Day Celebrations, and he'd been invited to speak at their annual conference about veteran-centered event design. "What happened in Austin wasn't magic," he would tell the conference attendees the following month. "It was the result of one person remembering that the purpose of these events is to honor actual people, not abstract concepts. Every one of us can create space for those moments of genuine recognition and connection." Marcus had also reached out to event planners in other cities, sharing the lessons learned from Austin and learning from their experiences. A network was forming of professionals committed to making veteran-focused events more meaningful and inclusive. Sarah Mitchell found herself at the center of a story that continued to evolve and expand. Her phone was still ringing with interview requests, but she was also hearing from veterans across the country who wanted to share their stories. From communities implementing new programs, from young people inspired to volunteer with veteran organizations. "I became a journalist because I believed stories could change things," she reflected in a personal essay that would be published the following Sunday. "But I never imagined that covering one moment of human decency could spark a national conversation about how we treat our veterans." Willie Nelson didn't just honor Jimmy Henderson that night, he reminded all of us that behind every uniform is a person deserving of dignity, recognition, and community. As the week came to a close, the video had been viewed over 50 million times. But the real measure of its impact wasn't in the numbers. It was in the conversations happening at dinner tables across America, the new volunteer programs being organized, the phone calls being made to veterans who hadn't heard from anyone in months, and the simple recognition that honoring service meant more than just saying, "Thank you for your service." It meant creating communities where veterans felt valued, connected, and supported. The wave that had started with Willie Nelson pushing a wheelchair through a crowd was still building, and its effects would be felt for years to come. 3 months after that Memorial Day evening, Jimmy Henderson found himself in places he never could have imagined. The shy, isolated veteran who had attended 15 Memorial Day celebrations feeling invisible was now the keynote speaker at the National Veterans Conference in Washington, D.C. "I never thought one moment could change so many lives," Jimmy said to the audience of veteran advocates, service providers, and policymakers. "But what I've learned is that it wasn't really one moment. It was the moment when someone finally saw me not as a symbol or a statistic, but as a person with a story worth hearing." Willie Nelson sat in the front row, beaming with pride as Jimmy spoke. The foundation they had established together was now operating in 12 cities, providing community support programs for elderly veterans. The model developed in Jimmy's apartment building, resident-led support networks combined with professional social services, was being replicated across the country. Sarah Mitchell, now a national correspondent covering veteran affairs, was documenting the conference for a documentary she was producing about the lasting effects of viral moments on social change. Her book, Invisible Heroes, the story behind Willie Nelson's gesture, would be published the following spring. The Austin moment has become a case study in how authentic human connection can cut through political divisions and inspire action, she told the documentary crew. Republicans and Democrats, young and old, urban and rural, everyone responded to the basic human dignity of Willie's gesture. The ripple effects had indeed transcended political boundaries. Conservative commentators had praised Willie's patriotism and respect for veterans. Progressive activists had highlighted the story as an example of caring for society's most vulnerable members. Veterans organizations across the political spectrum had used the moment to advocate for increased funding and support programs. Marcus Thompson had parlayed the lessons learned in Austin into a consulting business, helping cities and organizations across the country design veteran-centered events and programs. His Austin model of event planning, starting with the people being honored and building everything else around them, was being adopted nationwide. "The phone calls haven't stopped," Marcus told Sarah during a break at the conference. "Last week I was in Portland helping them redesign their Veterans Day parade. Next month I'm going to Nashville to work on their Military Appreciation Festival. Every conversation starts the same way. We saw what happened in Austin, and we want to do better." But the most profound changes were often the smallest and most personal. In Jimmy Henderson's apartment building, now officially renamed the Henderson House, resident-led programs had eliminated isolation among the veteran population. The monthly newsletter had become so popular that other apartment complexes were asking for copies. The community garden had grown into a small urban farm that supplied fresh vegetables to other low-income housing developments. Mrs. Chen, the Korean War widow who had started the weekly dinner gatherings, had become an unofficial spokesperson for elderly veterans' issues, testifying before the city council about accessible housing and health care access. Willie Nelson didn't just honor Jimmy that night, she told the council members. He honored all of us. But more importantly, he showed us how to honor each other. The documentary crew followed Willie on his visits to veteran communities across the country. At each stop, he spent time listening to individual stories, learning about local challenges, and connecting people with resources and each other. "I've been performing for 70 years, Willie told the cameras during a visit to a veterans facility in Chicago. "But nothing I've ever done has felt more important than these conversations. These folks gave everything for their country. The least we can do is give them our attention." The Willie Nelson Foundation for Veteran Community had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Corporate sponsors were lining up to support programs. Celebrities were donating time and money. But Willie insisted that the focus remain on individual veterans and their specific needs. "It's not about grand gestures or big donations," he explained to potential donors. "It's about making sure that every veteran knows they're seen, valued, and connected to their community. The Foundation's signature program, called Front Row Friends, paired veterans with community volunteers for ongoing friendship and support. The program had waiting lists in every city where it operated, with both veterans and volunteers eager to participate. Sarah Mitchell's documentation of these developments had evolved into something larger than she had initially planned. Her articles had sparked congressional hearings on veteran isolation and community support. Her book was being used as a textbook in social work and public policy programs. The documentary was scheduled to premiere at the Sundance Film Festival, but she remained most proud of the individual stories she had helped bring to light. Tommy Rodriguez in San Antonio was spending every day alone in his apartment until he saw the Willie Nelson video, she told the conference audience. It inspired him to reach out to his local VFW, where he met other Iraq veterans dealing with similar challenges. Now, he runs a support group that serves 50 veterans a month. Margaret Walsh in Denver was struggling with depression and isolation after her husband's death. She saw Jimmy Henderson's story and decided to attend a community event for the first time in 3 years. She's now volunteering with a program that helps other military widows navigate grief and loss. The stories multiplied across the country, each one representing a life touched by Willie's simple gesture of recognition and the community response it had inspired. As the one-year anniversary of the Memorial Day moment approached, Austin was preparing for a very different kind of celebration. Marcus Thompson and his team had spent months planning an event that truly centered veterans and their families. Instead of a traditional parade route with spectators watching from the sidelines, they had created multiple gathering spaces throughout downtown Austin, where veterans and community members could meet, share stories, and connect. Each space was hosted by a different veteran organization and featured activities designed to facilitate genuine interaction. Willie Nelson would still perform, but his concert would be part of a larger celebration that included veteran-led panels, family activities, resource fairs, and community meals. Most importantly, veterans weren't just being honored as a group, they were being celebrated as individuals with unique stories and ongoing contributions to their communities. This year, everyone who attends will leave knowing the name and story of at least one veteran, Marcus explained to the planning committee. We're not just putting on a show, we're building relationships. Jimmy Henderson had been asked to serve as the honorary chair of the anniversary celebration, a role he accepted with characteristic humility and grace. A year ago, I was just an old soldier sitting in the back corner, hoping someone might notice I was there, he reflected during a planning meeting. Now I'm surrounded by friends, working to make sure no other veteran ever feels invisible. Willie Nelson changed my life. But more importantly, he reminded all of us what it means to take care of each other. The planning meetings themselves had become models of community engagement. Veterans from all service eras and conflicts were involved in decision-making. Family members, community leaders, and local business owners contributed ideas and resources. High school students volunteered to help with logistics and documentation. Sarah Mitchell, now covering the anniversary preparations, was struck by the depth of change that had occurred in just 1 year. The Willie Nelson moment didn't just go viral, she wrote in her anniversary article. It created a template for authentic recognition and community building that has been replicated thousands of times across the country. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how Americans think about honoring service, from passive appreciation to active engagement. The statistical evidence supported her observations. Volunteer applications for veteran organizations had increased by 300% nationally since the Austin video went viral. Community-based veteran programs reported significant increases in both participation and funding. Mental health providers noted improvements in outcomes for veterans participating in community-connected programs. But the numbers, while impressive, couldn't capture the human reality of lives transformed by connection and recognition. Willie Nelson, now 82 and still touring regularly, had integrated veteran community visits into his concert schedule. Every tour stop included time for meeting with local veterans and learning about their needs and contributions. "People ask me all the time about that night in Austin," Willie said during a recent interview. "They want to know if I planned it, if I knew it would become such a big deal. The truth is, I just saw a man who deserved better than he was getting, and I tried to do something about it. Everything that came after, that was all of us remembering what we're supposed to be doing for each other." As Memorial Day 2025 approached, the anniversary celebration in Austin was attracting national attention. Veterans from across the country were planning to attend, drawn by the promise of an event designed specifically for them rather than about them. Jimmy Henderson, now 79 and in excellent spirits thanks to his expanded social connections and sense of purpose, was looking forward to the celebration, but also reflecting on the year of transformation he had experienced. "I used to think that getting old meant becoming invisible," he told Sarah during their final interview before the anniversary. "But what I've learned is that visibility isn't something that happens to you. It's something we create for each other. Willie Nelson saw me that night, but more importantly, he helped me see myself again. And now all of us are working to make sure no one else has to feel invisible." The anniversary Memorial Day celebration would indeed be different from any before it. Veterans would be at the center of every activity. Their stories would be shared and honored, and genuine connections would be formed that would last throughout the year. Willie Nelson's performance would be moving and memorable, but it would be just one part of a day focused entirely on the people being honored. But perhaps the most important legacy of that viral moment wasn't the programs it inspired or the policies it influenced. It was the simple reminder that every person has dignity and worth, that recognition and connection are basic human needs, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is see someone who has been overlooked and treat them with the respect they deserve. As Willie Nelson had said that night, and continued to say in the year that followed, "This is what America should be about, taking care of the people who took care of us." The video of Willie pushing Jimmy Henderson's wheelchair through the crowd had been viewed over 200 million times, but its real impact was measured in the millions of individual moments of recognition, connection, and community that it had inspired. One gesture of authentic human dignity had reminded an entire nation of its capacity for compassion and its responsibility to honor service not just with words, but with actions that ensured no veteran would ever again have to sit alone in the back corner, hoping to be seen. The wave that started in Austin was still spreading. One community, one conversation, one connection at a time. And at its center remained Jimmy Henderson, Willie Nelson, and the simple truth that every person deserves to be recognized, valued, and included in the communities they have served.